Going off to university and playing varsity rugby was honestly an incredible experience for me. And I'll be the first to acknowledge that. I know that's not everyone's story and not everyone's experience. And that's not to say that my experience was perfect by any means. It certainly wasn't, but it really helped me find my identity and find myself, as cliche as that sounds. But really, like, first thing, it really heavily impacted me with my identity off the field. I think especially coming in my first year as a closeted athlete and being surrounded by very proud and out teammates really helped me come to my own terms with my sexuality. And I don't think that would have happened if I didn't have the representation from my teammates. But performance-wise, I think being a varsity athlete at a small school like Acadia meant that you were suddenly put into the forefront of the community.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Trauma, Training and Transformation, the podcast where we explore how movement heals the mind, how adversity reshapes identity, and how performance evolves long after the final whistle. I'm Dr. James Alder, a chartered psychologist, researching trauma and performance, and someone deeply interested in what happens when identity shifts inside sport. For many student athletes, sport becomes more than participation, it becomes structure, it becomes belonging, it becomes measurement, it also becomes identity. But obviously during that time, something changes. Graduation, injury, illness, transition, and a role shift. Question quietly emerges. If I'm not the version of myself anymore, who am I becoming? Today's conversation is about this space, the space between who you are, who you were, and who you are becoming. I'm joined by a really great guest today, Annie Kennedy, bringing some experience here from the multi-sport background, varsity sport, life-threatening illness during her first year as a student athlete, significant injury rehabilitation during her time as an athlete, and the transition from being a structured school sport athlete to full-time sport development worker across the HRM in Nova Scotia. This story is not about the ending. It's about performance evolving. And Annie, thank you and welcome to the podcast. For the benefit of our listeners, please introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks, James, for having me on the podcast. Super excited to do this. But yeah, my name's Annie Kennedy. I'm based in Halifax, Nova Scotia, and rugby's been a massive part of my life. Sport in general has been a massive part of my life, and that's how you and I met, James, and particularly through the refereeing side of things. So yeah, that's a little bit about me, and excited to get into things.
Thank you very much. So let's look back at the early years in your development and early experiences in sport. Describe the journey, if you don't mind, from the formative years to where you are today.
Yeah, so sport's always been a massive part of my life, like I said. And ironically, my mother doesn't have a single athletic bone in her body, so safe to say that I didn't inherit anything from her. She grew up in a pretty traditional Filipino immigrant household where I think it was probably frowned upon for girls to play sport at that point. But she was always my number one fan and never missed a game growing up. And same thing with my dad. I think, honestly, my love for sport comes from my dad, who was a sports journalist, and we bonded over sport growing up and still do to this day. And I got to meet a lot of really cool sport heads growing up, particularly on the local female athletes that he would do stories on. And that was way before media coverage on women's sports was a thing like it is now. And it served as really early representation for me very early on. So I really think that my parents got it right. They did it right. And I'm so privileged that they were able to kind of shuffle things around and put me in any sport that I took an interest to. And they never put any pressure on me growing up to specialize early and really just let me enjoy being a kid. And I'm a firm believer that, and there's a lot of research to support this, obviously, that multi-sport upbringings have a direct correlation with positive life outcomes. And I think that's why I was able to find success very young as a young rugby player, which led to my first selections to Rugby Ontario's provincial teams and then eventually selections to junior national teams and being able to play at the post-secondary level. So yeah, multi-sport background definitely helped with my success as an athlete, as a young kid, but it also kind of helped that social side too of playing multiple sports and experiencing and being exposed to different leadership styles. And I think that's really shaped who I am today. And in my personal life, in my professional life, in my sport life, obviously, but being a good teammate is kind of something that I try to apply to all of my relationships with my friends and my family, my colleagues, and my partner, which particularly comes a little bit easier given we've been teammates before. But yeah, I think those sport experiences, particularly in those formative years, really helped shape who I am today.
Thank you for sharing that. It's really interested to know that your different background and your family members have helped flourish certain qualities within you, and then that's gone on to help you develop as an individual. So during your time as a student athlete, would you describe your identity then? What did performance mean to you at that early stage?
Yeah, I think going off to university and playing varsity rugby was honestly an incredible experience for me. And I'll be the first to acknowledge that. I know that's not everyone's story and not everyone's experience. And that's not to say that my experience was perfect by any means. It certainly wasn't, but it really helped me find my identity and find myself, as cliche as that sounds. But really, like, first thing, it really heavily impacted me with my identity off the field. I think especially coming in my first year as a closeted athlete and being surrounded by very proud and out teammates really helped me come to my own terms with my sexuality. And I don't think that would have happened if I didn't have the representation from my teammates. So, but performance wise, I think being a varsity athlete at a small school like Acadia meant that you were suddenly put into the forefront of the community. And I think on every team, there's always a few athletes maybe that are only in it for the backpack or the varsity jacket that you get with making a roster. But for me, being the competitive person that I was, I had performance to outcomes like winning and chasing a selection to a certain team or earning a starting jersey or something like that. But there's so much buzz around, I think, the student athlete nowadays that I think there's this preconceived idea of what it actually means. And being a varsity athlete is so much more than just being good at time management or juggling a busy schedule or winning or chasing banners, whatever that might be. And as a kid coming into university, I think I totally drank the Kool-Aid, and as many wide-eyed first-year athletes do, and was very extrinsically driven, I think, to keep up with what I thought being a student athlete meant. And I think as you develop over the course of your career, you kind of gain some life experience as well. Or your idea of what a student athlete means kind of shifts and evolves to that as you grow up a little bit.
And a lot of athletes, and it's not a negative thing really, but results become a tangible thing that helps create your identity, doesn't it? It reinforces it as a student athlete. And in your first year as a student athlete at university, you face many steps of adversity, especially around your health. How did that experience influence your relationship, not just with training and your body, but the overall environment?
Yeah, so I can kind of dive into that a little bit. Heading into my first year, coming off the highs of making my first junior national team. And I also was stepping into a team that was seeing a lot of turnover. So that meant a lot of opportunity for rookies like myself who were super eager to get on the field. And I ended up earning the fullback starting position and was honestly, I couldn't have asked for a better start to my varsity career. I was having a great season, and then heading into the last quarter of the season, very quickly and suddenly became very critically ill, and things got bad really, really quickly over the span of just several hours. And it was to the point where they had to quickly expedite things and induce me into a coma and fly my parents in because they really wasn't sure. They weren't sure if I was going to make it because of how things were becoming or how unstable things were becoming, and put me on life support ultimately. And they suspected it was bacterial meningitis, which with that came a lot of cognitive and physical complications with my body and my mind. And obviously this brought my season to a very abrupt ending. And as an 18-year-old who was having a great start to their varsity career, it was devastating. And not only that, it meant that I had a really long road ahead to make a recovery to rugby, to school, and just life in general. I was hospitalized for over a month. So the incident left me with some pretty significant nerve damage in my kicking foot, which I'll have for the rest of my life. But the setback really served as motivation to get back into the game. And so many learnings came out of that kind of experience. And I know my family and I are forever grateful for the community that rallied around me during that time, especially my teammates, the athletics department, friends back home, family back home, obviously the team of incredible ICU nurses and doctors that helped me as well. But I think another learning in hindsight now is the rehab and treating it as a holistic experience rather than just getting back into physical shape. I think I put my mental recovery on the back burner while I was really just hyper focused on the physical self. And that definitely shot me in the foot. No pun intended. But again, this happened when I was a kid, and I don't think I fully understood the gravity of the situation until honestly a few years ago when my frontal lobe finally fully developed and I understood kind of what happened. And the experience sticks with me to this day. Not gonna lie, but it's in a way that has made me so grateful for my health and just a deeper appreciation for the things that my body allows me to do every day. And I think I hold myself and I keep myself accountable to hold myself to that, to make sure that I can do these things for as long as possible, because I know now and have experienced firsthand that your health can be taken away from you in the blink of an eye.
First of all, thank you for sharing that. It's quite a powerful message that a lot of listeners will take on board and actually use it in their own journeys. But I'm really thankful that you're here today to share that with us. If you look back at that time, though, that was quite for a young person with a traumatic, life-threatening illness. How was that recovery? Is there a point in that recovery that you can look back at now and thinking that was the time that I felt I've made some resemblance of who Annie was?
Yeah, I mean, the experience is it's something that I get like it's gonna stick with me for the rest of my life. But there, like I said, there were so many learnings that came out of it, and I think for the team as well. And it really felt I felt very loved in my life. You know, as traumatic as an experience that was, I felt the love from the community, and the rugby community just has such a beautiful way of rallying around each other when something like this happens.
Oh, excuse me. Obviously, you're recovering from such a traumatic event, and then you're using rugby and that community connection to try and get back into the team. And then there becomes another injury. Rehab free, breaking your jaw, forces you to slow down a little bit. So you can't go as quick as you'd like to go. Interrupts your recovery rhythm from your illness. Then you get trying to get back into the team. You then get another injury. What do these periods teach you about your own resilience beyond simply just a physical recovery and the mental recovery, as you touched on earlier?
100%. I mean, I think every rugby or player can relate to the injuries. I think every rugby player, you'd be pretty hard pressed to find somebody who hasn't been injured in the rugby scene. But yeah, in particular, my third year, I ended up breaking my jaw in two places in the opening play of our quarterfinal at nationals, and I knew something was wrong as soon as the collision happened. And it wasn't until halftime that I realized my jaw was broken once the adrenaline started to leave my body, like a lot of athletes to go through. But luckily, this injury came at the end of the season, which meant that there was no added pressure to return to play, which really meant that I could slow down. And returning to a contact sport after breaking your jaw definitely messes with your mind a little bit. And I always like to make the joke that as a smaller rugby player, I don't particularly love the contact area. I've always been pretty allergic to the tackle and the contact area, but returning to the rugby after breaking your jaw definitely didn't help with that. And I think injuries are a universal part of the sport, like I said, but I think every athlete can relate to the grind of rehabbing an injury and trying to make their return to their sport and return to the point where they left off pre-injury. And it can be incredibly frustrating. And injuries really force you to be resilient and focus on what you can control. So that's a life skill that is so important for especially life after sport. And those are some of the bigger takeaways that I had from recovering from illness and injury.
Resilience in some people is not really dramatic. You foster that really. However, yours have been off the back of two quite serious, impactful illness and injury in your life. So did that injury deepen your understanding then of what performance is, especially in way of competition? How did you come back from that major injury?
Yeah, definitely. Like I said, I think looking at it hindsight, I think at that point was really so just hyper focused on that physical side. I think a lot of when athletes get injured, they really just focus on that physical side. And like I said, I think I from the get go I had a bit of a mental barrier when it came to the contact area. And so maybe that's an area that in hindsight, I should have maybe looked at a little bit closer with when I was rehabbing some of these injuries is, okay, what can we do to make sure that we do return to play, that your physical self is there, but also your mental self is also just has gone through that rehab period with you as well.
People of our stature, yes, we try and avoid the big collisions in rugby, and there's many. Other skills tend to be enhanced, evasion skills, decision making under pressure. But we do enhance our own different skills in a game because we know that that's an element that we don't want to be involved with. What skills do you remember that your special qualities as a rugby player?
Yeah, I mean, I think you said it. I think that's kind of something that I was known for is the footwork and being agile and being able to, obviously didn't have the size, but what I did have was the ability to kind of see space and be evasive and avoid rugby. Right. Rugby is, you try to avoid contact at some points. And for someone smaller like myself, yeah, avoiding contact was kind of one of my strengths and getting around defenders that way. Yeah, it's a beautiful sport that way where any shape and size can get into the sport and succeed.
So you're coming to the end of your structured sports environment at school into a career which then led on to being involved in sport as a profession, really, with HRM. How did you navigate that transition from being a student athlete to a career in sport while carrying all these lessons from your many adversities along the way?
Yeah, I think After graduation, in hindsight, I felt incredibly lost, and I don't think I realized that at the time. I was one of few of our from our graduating class who was able to land a full-time teaching gig right out of graduation, and I think that kind of maybe disguised or served as a distraction from some of the realities of struggling with that transition from school to working life. And just to compound things, I was facing some pretty significant life changes, like getting out of a pretty long-term relationship and moving to a different city and closing the chapter of my high performance playing days, and obviously moving away from my core circle of friends who I'd surrounded myself with in university for the last 5 or 6 years of my life. And so felt very isolated and overwhelmed with the transition, as many student athletes do. And I can honestly say that it's only been in the last year or two, honestly, that I've really felt like I've landed on my feet since graduation. And I want to acknowledge that that transition looks different for everyone, and especially today, and with social media having a massive part of making you feel like you're falling behind, like you should be buying a house or traveling the world and finding yourself in South Asia. I think the big things that I did to help myself with that transition was to surround myself with community, whether it was through rugby or new friends or pushing myself to get outside my comfort zone and try new things is really what helped me with my transition. And making friends as an adult is totally different than making friends as a kid. It's harder. It's way harder, but it's a vital part of the transitions. Just like rehabbing injuries, where it can be a very isolating experience, making sure that you have friends and you have family or chosen family, I like to use the term, is really important in that transition period.
Everything in life is there to test you, from being a student athlete to finding your first job, and that all hopefully those skills learned through them transitions will help you to be better in the next step. So at what point through your evolution of employment do you think definition of performance has changed along the way? Instead of it being results driven in sport, it's more sustainable, more lifelong in the sense of purpose driven.
Yeah, I think I mentioned before that I was a little naive student athlete, and give myself a little bit of grace as well, because I think I did the best with what I had and what I knew at the time, but was so hyper focused on those outcomes and those results based outcomes like you had mentioned and selections, and I think that maybe ruined the sport for me a little bit. And it wasn't only until the pandemic when my perspective, I think, changed a little bit from switching from that results based to more of a sustainable fun based perspective. Got it, like again, it allowed me to slow down. I got into running, tried some different styles of training, and just focused overall on overall health rather than performance for rugby. I always played my best rugby, as many rugby players do when they're having fun, and I think the same can be said for life as well. But I think I'll always train like an athlete because I intrinsically enjoy it so much. But I just do so now in a way that's a little bit more flexible and forgiving. And it's really helped me listen to my body in the last few years. And I love setting new goals for myself, whether it's in the gym or certain benchmarks. But the key now for me is flexibility and forgiveness. And so I do plyometrics. I do resistance training. I keep up with my fitness, and so I can continue doing the things that I enjoy in life without thinking twice. Like, I want to be able to jump into a rugby game and not get hurt, or at least reduce the chances of me getting hurt, and or referee like a high paced game, whether it's in rugby, basketball, or soccer, and not feel gassed and make those decisions under pressure and under fatigue, or like even just challenge myself with a new fitness goal, like signing up for a triathlon or something that I'll be doing this summer, and be able to do that without starting from ground zero and have a solid base to work off of. So with all that said, I think the key is just that flexibility and forgiveness. I kind of have like a personal mantra to myself of like never miss twice. And if and when I do, I'm in a spot now where I'm more forgiving rather than judgmental towards myself.
And rightly so. I mean, you mentioned COVID there, and I think it did have a massive reset for a lot of people. And you touched on how you use fitness in a unique way now of evolving yourself and increasing your own knowledge, especially an intrinsic way of what you get from it more than anything else. I'd like to just touch back on what you mentioned really early on, and that is you felt that your mental health was impacted because you focused purely on the physical. So if you don't mind, would you talk about how impactful the new Annie is using fitness and what impact that's having on your mental health now?
Yeah, and I appreciate you bringing that up, because I think I touched on kind of like my whys for fitness now, and a lot of it was so I can jump in the rugby game, so I can do the hike with my friends and not feel gassed and whatever it is. But a big part of why I'm active and why I love being in the sports community is because of the mental health benefits. And I find when I'm not going to the gym or I'm not as active as I usually am. I'm so in tune with my body now that I know that it's going to impact my mental health. So it's just, again, it's not about doing it every single day, but it's just creating those habits and consistency that, like mental health, like it comes in waves, and you have some high moments, you have some low moments, but if you can kind of consistently get into the gym, be active, we know how good movement is for our body. It's so connected, right? Your body and your mind. So I know that the benefits of physical activity just helps me so much with my mental health. And yeah, I think that's a big reason intrinsically as well why I love being active.
I appreciate you sharing that. One of the reasons for this podcast is share experiences, lived experiences from many people, including yourself, to people you may be listening who always feel like fitness or sport could be something to be feared because it means physically doing something that they're not comfortable in. And actually, you touched on there, doing something for you that's challenging but not out of the realms of possibilities. And what's really good is that you've transitioned throughout your life using positive natured fitness and exercise to reassure yourself, so then your mental health will always feel good. Would that be fair?
100%. Yeah, totally agree. Sorry.
As athlete, excuse me, as a sports athlete, you've gone on to represent your province, and in a lot of these roles, you've had key leadership positions, and then out of nowhere, Annie Kennedy becomes a referee. What was that about?
Yeah, two old guys, Martin Lewis and James Alder, came up to me and said, "You got to give this a go." So here I am, giving it a go. But yeah, no, with the refereeing stuff, like it's been such an incredible experience, and I've been really privileged in the last couple of years to kind of get a taste of what maybe the higher performance level of refereeing looks like. And I think my heart really lies with the community side of refereeing, and it's nice to be able to push yourself, and it's fun to kind of chase some of those goals and whatnot. But like I said earlier, I think community is really where you see a lot of the fun parts of refereeing. You get to kind of build relationships with those coaches and those players and maybe some old teammates as well that just in a different role. And it's such a great way to keep involved with the rugby community, especially after your playing days. So that's my subtle plug to anyone who's maybe entering the end of their playing career and want to stay involved with the game. Refereeing such a great avenue for that.
Yeah, and refereeing is quite a unique role, really. You're part of developing the game, regardless which sport you're in. And you touched early on about basketball and soccer, and they're all very unique in their own way, but you're developing players, the overall sport. And what was really special to see over the last 12 months is seeing you on the TV doing national level games. So as a referee, what was that like? What was that pressure like for you as an individual, but what was that environment like for you to thrive in?
Yeah, I mean, I like you said, like I think I have experienced what it's like to play in those games at the national level. So I think part of that is really helpful, having that lived experience, that playing experience in these games. It's like I can empathize with a lot of the players who are in those games because I was in their shoes not too long ago. But to see it from the other side and be that person, like you said, to facilitate the game at the highest level of women's rugby that we have in this country is really cool. And that's never an experience that I take for granted. And just it's pretty cool to say that you get to referee some of our best rugby players that we have in this country, and you're helping them facilitate you're facilitating their development. And it's really cool when you get to see them go on and compete for our country, and you get to cheer them on at a World Cup or the Olympics, whatever that might be. And just to be a very small part of that, of their journey in that is really, really cool.
Congratulations on your ability to go there and perform at such an high level. And I hope you continue to grow and get to the next stage of your refereeing development, whichever sport you go into, but hopefully rugby. Obviously, you talked earlier on about how your job now is in sport. So, as being a lifelong performer in both sport and career, what does that mean to you now, especially after being a competitive student athlete?
Yeah, I think being a lifelong performer means that you're bringing some of those lessons that you learned as a competitive student athlete and implementing them into every facet of your life. And I'm not saying that every aspect of your life needs to be high performance or competitive, but I think almost every aspect of my life can benefit from teamwork and leadership and reflection and self-awareness. And as you mentioned, and as I've stepped into that refereeing world and in rugby and basketball and soccer in the last few years, reflection piece is something that's so important. And it's not always about identifying what went wrong or maybe a decision that you'd want back or whatnot, but it's really about identifying those opportunities to improve. And that's something that I try to do on and off the pitch. And I try not to get caught up in the selections or the assignments or chasing whatever, because I don't want history repeating itself for me, like it did with my playing days, where maybe I was a little bit too focused on or put too much pressure on myself, because it ruined it for me for a little bit. I do it now because I love sports and not because I'm chasing an outcome. That doesn't mean that I can't challenge myself, though, to maybe help myself improve and help support the development of rugby and basketball and soccer in this province. So I think that when your lifelong performer comes into play, when you strike a good balance of bettering yourself, but without losing yourself in the process too.
Thank you very much for sharing that. You've gone through a lot of adversity. So when you look into the future, what does future Annie Kennedy look like? And where's she going to be? Yeah.
That's a good question. Future Annie Kennedy is doing something that just honestly, my mom has this really great saying of just happy and healthy and safe. If I have those three things, doesn't matter where I am. I think if I can have those three things, my health is obviously something that's really important to me, and being happy. I think, if I can just continue living the life that I'm living now, future Annie is going to be pretty happy with that.
Incredible, mate. And all the very best and good wishes to whatever you choose to do. I'm sure you're going to be successful and happy no matter what it is. So before we come to the end, if you had the opportunity to speak to Annie Kennedy back then, or a student athlete, first of all, going through university, or just any person starting on the journey to recovery or journey of discovery, what would be the message that you would have for them?
Yeah, I think when it comes to that transition piece or maybe facing adversity is just stay connected to people. The transition, particularly from being a student athlete to the working world, is incredibly tough, and that just gets compounded when you do it alone. My advice to anyone graduating soon or recently graduated is just stay connected to your pals and do things outside of your comfort zone that maybe help you meet new people, and just look out for one another. You know, chances are that you're not the only one that's struggling, and checking in on a friend going through something similar can almost always is mutually beneficial. And that the transition is tough, say, but it's also such an exciting time of life as well. And you should use those skills that you learned in your undergrad and in the classroom and in your sport in those first few roles that you land outside of graduation. So I think the days of staying in the same profession, I'm living proof of this, but the days of staying in the same profession, maybe like our parents did for your entire career, is long over. And changing careers is a very exciting thing to me personally, and just allows you to keep building on your professional skill set. And so I left the traditional classroom setting of education, but I still get to use those skills every single day from my teaching career in the roles that I have now. So I think my advice is just find your people, stay connected, maybe reach out to that old teammate or that old friend who might be going through something similar, and always makes that transition a lot easier when you have people in your corner.
Appreciate that. And Annie, thank you very much for joining us today. It's been a very powerful and also heartwarming conversation, especially talking about the adversities that you've had to overcome in your very younger student days, to seeing you flourish now in your, not just your profession, but on the rugby field as a match official. Everybody, today's episode resonated with you and you'd like to learn more about adversity, please follow, like, and subscribe this podcast. You can find it on Spotify, Apple, or Amazon, or wherever you find your podcasts. You can also watch the video on James Alder 003 on YouTube. You can also join my Substack newsletter, which comes out weekly on transformation through training. If you'd like to continue to support me through these conversations, you can buy me a coffee. All the links are below in the description box. Share this episode with a teammate, a coach, someone navigating change, or just someone who you believe needs to hear it. Because adversity is not the end of performance. It's a moment identity becomes mature. And when the role changes, the performer doesn't disappear. They simply evolve. So until next time, keep training your body, strengthening the mind, transform through movement. And remember, when external performances fades, internal performance begins. Thank you. See you at the next one.